Hi there, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I'm Ella, Jeff's assistant. Great to see you. Hope you had a wonderful week. Well, we've got another powerful thumbnail this week. It looks like hell is coming to breakfast, and Jeff is about to break it down. So let's get started, Jeff. Let's not waste a moment.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, and it is. It really is crazy. You know, my last couple of thumbnails have been kind of fun only because it kind of got precipitated by a client. And I thought, well, you know, the more I look at this, the more, you know, things are pretty crazy. And of course, you know, I wanted to rattle through a few things here before we kind of get to the main topic here. And that is, you know, the climate change stuff that's been going on. And there was a really great article that came out about how the climate changers can't seem to explain why the climate has been hotter than this in the 20s and 30s and as far back as we go. And then, of course, scientists have extrapolated, quite possibly the real scientists, that this is not that unusual of a phenomena. And unlike AOC and the rest of the alarmists, we're not going to, you know, just get destroyed here any second. And there's actually hardcore data. Again, I always go back to my grandmother, who was born in 1907, saw literally World War I as a child, saw the Great Depression, saw the Dust Bowl, which talk about insane weather. And then, of course, World War II and, you know, the Korean War, on and on. So that was a roller coaster ride right there. And the world never ends. You know, again, I always go back to my friend in 1977 led me into the theater. Jeff, you've got to see this movie. It was The Late Great Planet Earth from Orson Welles was the narrator on it. And it was the kind of wrongly interpreted quatrains from Nostradamus. And of course, Nostradamus gets a lot of press even still today. And I'm not saying he was wrong, but I think there's been a lot of misinterpretations. And according to that movie, we shouldn't be alive right now. I mean, 1985, that was it. Axis tips, 1,000-mile-an-hour winds, the world's going to end. So I don't want to sound alarmist with this thumbnail, but on the other hand, we'll talk about that coming up. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and it's almost like a psyops. You know, that's one of the techniques the military will tell you about is what you do is you accuse your enemy of exactly what you're doing. And then that turns the tables. And this is exactly, I think, being used. I'm not saying climate, you know, issues aren't at hand here, but I'm not so sure it's all farting cows and SUVs. The sun, the magnetics of the sun, the solar flares have been off the charts. There's a lot of possible reasons why this is happening. And again, I think this is because the communists are using this to attack the energy grids and destroy the middle class, not only of America, but quite possibly globally. There's no better way to do it than unplug the current energy systems, which inflates the cost of goods. And then what do we end up with? Everybody screaming, oh my God, you know, something must be done. Well, they'll slip digital currency and the noose around our neck. So this is a theme I've been saying a lot. The other interesting little bit of news, I just want to mention that, you know, there's some very interesting thing on climate stuff going on. I wanted to mention, we didn't mention last podcast, Tony Bennett passed away. And I always really liked him. You know, I think most people would agree. He contributed a lot to music and singing and entertainment. Definitely was almost 97 years old. He lived to be, I think, 96 years old, 11 months and 16 days. I'm not that smart. The computer figures it out. And what's interesting about his Nadi astrology is it really showed this was the end of karma. The moon's south node was right over his Saturn, and Saturn was also very heavily involved, and so was Jupiter. So very interesting. I always like to look at this to see if there's correlation, which brings next person, Sinead O'Connor. And of course, she's the controversial singer who did put out some really amazing stuff. And what's interesting about her is she absolutely, at the young age of 56, she died. She absolutely had classic K2, which is, again, the moon's eclipse point, the south point, right on her Saturn, and Jupiter was exactly over her node. So, again, these are classic times that I always pay attention to in my life, and I always like to bring up to people. When I see these things in readings, I always say, you know, this is a time you really want to watch your health. Don't do business as normal. You know, reflexology, see the doctor, whatever you got to do. Change your eating habits, but pay attention. Just lately, I've had some really interesting stuff with the thyroid and the thymus, and I have found huge crystal points right in the reflexology, and I've been breaking it up, and it's had some really powerful changes in me, and I feel a lot better from doing it. So we're always going to be challenged, I don't care how young or old we are, with different energies coming at us, and it's a great thing to pay attention to. So anyways, that was a couple of things I wanted to speak about. The other thing I wanted to get into is, of course, the big story, and this is really the thumbnail of kind of this podcast, and that is what's going on with the government. And it's not just Biden and Hunter. And, of course, Biden's plea deal, or Hunter Biden's plea deal, was just rejected by the judge. Oh boy, talk about light a fuse to a powder keg, because you know who's next? Joe Biden.
It wasn't my fault! You miserable slug. You think you can talk your way out of this? You betrayed me. No, I didn't. Honest. There was an earthquake, a terrible flood, locusts. It wasn't my fault, I swear to God!
This is just a matter of time before, the slow marching train of justice catches up and proves all the thievery and treasonous acts that have been going on, not only with Biden, but I think a lot of people behind the scenes. And that's why this one just might mirror what the astrology says. Why? Because I've been mentioning this a lot. The United States has a series of aspects going on right now that's very, very powerful. And this also is intertwined with the entire world. And again, ever since COVID 2020, we've had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is always a dramatic effect on society. Most importantly, we had the 240-year Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which is ushering in a new era. Huge. Secondly, we've also got a primary direction. Now, that's a fancy term for each year since a person's birth or a country's formation. You have the planets eking forward 1 degree per year. There's all kinds of fancy calculations for that, but I keep it simple, and I have found that the solar arcs really work well. And this November, we have Mars conjuncting the United States moon. And I don't think anybody needs a brick to fall on their head to figure out what kind of shape this country's in. We've got no cash bail. We've got the borders being flooded. We've got inflation off the charts. And then we've got, the Fed raising interest rates. Well, the last time they did that it caused the Great Depression. And it's almost as though they are steering the plane as fast as they can into the ground without the landing gear, nose first. And we're in a collision course with a lot of trouble here. And I hope I'm wrong about that. But, I've been, I'm not an alarmist. And again, I've mentioned, I've gone through many different predictions of other people, again, the Nostradamus stuff, the Mayan calendar, Y2K, and on and on and on. And, every other day, the world's ending, right? But I really would say the world's not going to end. Life as we know it is changing. They're shutting down our energy, which is, it's very noble to try and find free energy. But in the meantime, can we transition instead of just shut it all down and destroy the economy before you have something else to put in place? They don't want a smooth transition. They want a destructive transition, because then they can slip in their new agendas. So this is really the issue of the podcast. And I think, like I said last podcast, I think the only difference between, again, Biden and the Titanic, because the Titanic had some good music when it went down. I really do. I think this guy's history, and I've mentioned this many times before, the inauguration chart, the time that Biden was signed in, horrible. Horrible. It just looks like a collision course with disaster. And that's very likely what it's going to be here. And of course, the justice system is slower than snails, but sooner or later, I think this guy is going down. And what makes me nervous is it's not going to be just Joe Biden. The rest of the people surrounding this. I think there's going to be a lot of implications, including Ukraine and many of the things going on with China infiltrating our country, bending our education systems around. They just reported that China has been discovered to be heavily influencing the K-12 school systems. This isn't the colleges anymore, like right in there. And when you look at what's really happening from a PSYOPs kind of point, this is really kind of communism 101. And I hate to sound so blunt, but that's where we're at. And if we get shut down, we get shut down. But I can tell you that there's some very questionable things that have been going on with the actions of many areas of this government and also in other places in the world. And it mirrors the astrology. And I think we're going to see backlash come this fall. So the other thing I wanted to get into, and this is really what I want to drive home, is I've been mentioning in the last podcast that Venus is going retrograde. And this again is the ancient myth of Quetzalcoatl and also Lucifer falling. And what we find is, examining these throughout the years, oftentimes scandalous things that have been buried for a while or a long time start to come to fruition. And of course, that's the metaphor when Venus, in its retrogradation between the Earth and the Sun, goes into what we call combustion. That's an alignment with Venus and the Sun. And all of that is happening between now and the middle of August, actually August 13th to be exact. That's when it goes into what we call combustion. It's right around 3:30 a.m. on August 13th. But without getting too detailed, because these things often aren't right to the exactness, because especially with a media that never tells you the truth anyhow, you wouldn't know. So, but anyways, long story short, then it goes into what we call Kazami. And then it goes into its Oriental phase. Now, remember, we have to tie all this, and this is what's complex about astrology. You have to tie all this into what we call confluence, which means you don't just have one aspect in the sky. You've got a multitude of things going on. In fact, when you really look at the entire celestial mechanics, it's almost beyond examination. It's so complex because you have, again, the precession of the equinoxes, the solar system going around. You have all these fixed stars, which are so complex, it's almost immeasurable. And these, of course, are the yugas and the time periods. But more importantly, we have the inner cycles of the solar system, which is the Saturn, also known as Sarisate, going over the United States moon. I personally think with the Pluto return on the United States all happening in the sidereal zodiac throughout 2024, we're going to probably see one of the most dramatic cycles this country has ever seen. I wouldn't even be surprised if we didn't have an election or something that catastrophic happens. And the reason being, I also mentioned primary directed Mars. Now, when I say primary directed, that's a fancy term for any time someone is born or a country is born or something is concretized. Each year of the rotation of the Earth, and even for the flat earthers, it's still the cycle of the diurnal cycles, that you end up with each planet being progressed 1 degree per year. Well, what's about to happen? The United States is 247 years old as of this last July, and we have, in 247 years, Mars about to conjunct the United States moon. This never happened before, never going to happen again for another 360 years. So this, I can't drive home how significant these energies are and how rare they are. So 360 years, or 365 if you want to be exact, is a long, long time. So the bottom line is, what does it mean? Well, we could really see some violence, cyber attacks. I wouldn't be surprised if the owners feel like the walls are closing in on them. They'd nuke a city. They'll cause a war. They'll do whatever they can do. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, but I think this is really a good time to be more prudent. I think, again, store up a little extra food, a little extra petty cash on hand, that kind of stuff, Wouldn't you agree, Ella?
I do. And I'm glad you're saying this. You brought this up in last week's podcast, and I'm glad you're bringing it up again because it is a fiery time, and you can feel it. And we need to be aware of it, and we need to protect ourselves, So I'm glad you're bringing this up and saying all of this because the demonic forces are pretty angry right now, I feel like, because we're not going to let them win. We're not going to let that energy win. And I feel like they can pick that up. They can feel that demonic energy can feel it. It can absolutely feel it. So I say, we gotta be on our toes here for sure.
Exactly. I had mentioned it was really great. I got to give a talk to the Daughters of the Revolution. These are people that were descendants of actual people that fought in the Revolutionary War. It was really an honor. They were wonderful people. It's right here in Simi Valley in California, not too far from the Reagan Library. And I'd given a talk, or you could say a presentation about the divinity of America and how George Washington had these three visions. The first one, and that was this angel that appeared to George Washington in the Valley Forge area, where he was so destitute, he was about to give up because it was so depleted in terms of they didn't have food, they didn't have ammunition. You got to remember, the colonists weren't backed by this huge industrial situation like England was. England has this vast reservoirs of resources and wealth and manufacturing. And, the colonies were fledgling at this time. So, it was really destitute. And he had these three visions, which essentially assured him that he would win this war, even though it didn't look like it. And of course, we saw the tables turn later on in the war, especially when he crossed the Potomac, which is so famous. And we're in a way there right now. We've got the globalists infiltrating this country in every area of life, much more so than I think we realize. And it is exceedingly dangerous. We need a little divine intervention. And what's so fun about this is when you look back at the Constitution, and again, the Bill of Rights, the freedom for everyone, I don't care what race, creed, how tall, short, fat, skinny, it doesn't matter. This is a pillar for humanity, this document. And I really feel that we're going to go through a roller coaster ride. Hell might just be coming to breakfast between now and 2025. The thing I like is 2025 shows hope at the end of the tunnel. But in the meantime, we got to be strong. And I think we really need to be aware of the forces that are coming at us. And they are demonic. They truly, truly are. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say in this podcast. Again, not being an alarmist, just trying to get people to see that these are times to be much more aware. And I think protect your family and protect, your loved ones as best you can, and put your helmet on because it could get a little crazy.
Put your helmet on. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for this. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a great week ahead. Stay positive, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.